So I test drove a Tesla. What's up, everybody? Kojak Durham here. I'm a regular guy with a wide range of interests, and today I'm interested in telling you about my recent Tesla Model S test drive. So I was given the opportunity to drive a Tesla Model S, and let me say, I think I'm in love. I wanted to make sure I did the experience justice, so here goes. So I found myself winding down a back road looking for the dealership, which isn't really a dealership at all. It sort of reminded me of a cell phone store. There's lots of displays inside. The product isn't kept there. It's kept in the back or someplace else, as in the case with Tesla. When I got to the dealership, I found myself looking at lots of other little groups of smiling, happy, wide-eyed people who were there getting their pre-test drive tours of the various models that Tesla offers. I was there to look at the Model S, but I really did like the Model X, their SUV. So I was immediately greeted by a hip young staff, which kind of reminded me of an Apple store. They're a bit like the geniuses at Apple. Nicely dressed, friendly, knowledgeable. They confirmed who I was and then started giving me the rundown. So in the back, I was shown the various charging options. Included with the Model S is a charging cable for a standard 110, 120 outlet that you can plug into any household outlet for top-up charging. Various estimates, range on how much you get out of a standard home outlet. It's typically 3 to 5 miles of driving per hour of charge, hence my designation as a top-up charge. If you get home, you work at like 6:30 p.m., then you leave the next morning at 7:30 a.m. That gives you about 11 hours of charge. So you've regained 33 to 55 miles worth of driving. Tesla also sells various adapters for the charging cable, including one for a 240 volt outlet that can charge the entire vehicle from basically dead batteries to full overnight in roughly 10.5 hours. Tesla also sells an add-on power booster called a wall connector that can charge the batteries of a 75 kilowatt battery model in about 8 hours and 45 minutes, or the 100 kilowatt hour in 5 hours and 45 minutes. Obviously, you want to have one of these 240 volt outlets installed in your garage by an electrician if you drive any more than 33 to 55 miles a day, unless you do plan on marathon charging over the weekend or pony up for a wall connector. Of course, none of this matters if you have a supercharger station close by or have a charging station at or near where you work. A previous employer of mine actually had 6 or 8 of these, so that wouldn't have been an issue there. So exactly what is a supercharger station? Tesla Motors runs a network of high-power charging stations, the equivalent of gas stations for Tesla owners, free of charge. Yep, I said it, free of charge. Tesla states on their site that your Tesla can regain about 170 miles worth of battery charge in as little as 30 minutes. These stations tend to be built along major U.S. highway corridors such as I-40, I-85. Those are the two that I was most concerned with. The current, as of October 1st, 2017, map of their charging stations shows 1,000 of these stations in North America alone. Tesla also has lists of charging stations on their site. I wasn't sure how these, they call them destination charging stations, so I wasn't sure how these differed from the supercharger stations, so I investigated it. Destination stations are essentially located at common destinations for consumers, such as museums, shopping malls, hotels, etc., with the bulk of them located at hotels. These would be places you might go for a longer period of time than the 30 minutes Tesla references on their supercharging stations. So I was curious about the range, and I asked, and I was shown the real-world numbers as they differ from the EPA published numbers and information I'd gotten from various places online. The 75 kilowatt hour Model S, according to the EPA, gets roughly 250 miles per full charge. Real-world data indicates that this is closer to 300 miles. The 100 kilowatt hour battery pack is listed at 335 miles, but real-world driving numbers indicate that this is close to 360 miles. So one thing to keep in mind about this car is that it's wired. I mean seriously wired. The EPA mileage estimates are just that, estimates. Tesla's cars are all connected to Tesla via a complex wireless network. They upload telemetry data, download software and firmware patches, and navigation apps automatically. So that said, Tesla knows exactly how well or how poorly the vehicles are performing under certain conditions. This way, they can send out software patches to make their cars more efficient, or even add features or options to the vehicle's software. This is another free service that's offered for the life of the vehicle. So when we were off to meet the car, I was going to pilot. So it's not a test drive, and they're not taking a salesperson with you. You're taking a co-pilot. So I test drove a black 75 kilowatt hour rear wheel drive only Model S that Tesla actually no longer makes. They only make the all-wheel drive model now. So this one was a stock model that they just had there at the dealership. So I'd seen the vehicle that I was going to drive as I was walking in, but when I got up close and started looking in it, I was dumbfounded at the luxury in the vehicle. The LED daylight running lights, they were really sharp, really bright. The shape of the car was really sleek, and the fit and finish was impeccable. The particular unit that I saw was a holdover, like I said, with a set of options that are no longer offered, such as a rear-wheel drive only, and all the new models are 75D, which is the D for dual motor, both front and rear. Interestingly, the co-pilot told me that all the rear-wheel drive model, that the all-wheel drive model is more efficient with respect to battery usage, and therefore has a longer range with the same 75 kilowatt battery pack. Who knew? So I asked the co-pilot, well, what's under the hood since there's no engine in there? So he popped the hood and showed me. There's actually a trunk up there. It's a little small. It doesn't take up the entire under the trunk area, but it's because there's things like an air conditioner compressor, brake boosters, etc. under a plastic panel. But still, there's a trunk in the front. Really cool. So then I was like, well, let me see what the actual trunk looked like. It was huge. So one thing that I thought was neat that Tesla also offers on their sedan, their Model S, an additional third row seating for children in the back. The area in the bottom of the rear, basically deck, the trunk, was hinged and had a really deep well that you could put things, but that's where the children's legs would go, and the rear-facing seats would be back-to-back with the rear seats. So these are only good for smaller children and maybe young teens, but I think it's a really neat option that I've never seen in a sedan before. This is usually something you see in the arena of like the minivan. So we walked around the vehicle interior, and it's really nice and really comfortable. The rear seat basically has full-size seating for 3 adults, so it was really nice. The front seats looked just as good, and they were really comfortable. Stitching was all really good. So the center console in the front had, a couple of cup holders, which I felt kind of weird about, being an electric vehicle and liquids, but I was told that was no big deal. So there were 2 USB ports, a 12-volt accessory port. Well, then I climbed in and almost started giggling like a lunatic. The car automatically powers up when you get in. The climate control, stereo, all that stuff come alive in all their high-tech glory. The first thing I noticed was the massive 17-inch display in the center. I've owned TVs smaller than that. It's really a thing of beauty, and it's the control center for the entire car. This is where you set all of your vehicle details, climate preferences, radio, navigation, phone, Bluetooth connectivity, your camera views, calendar. It even has heated seats. So I immediately started playing with it. So the navigation display is powered by Google Maps, so anything you can see on Google you can get on the display. The on-screen keyboard is massive and makes it easy to type on. So I was looking for local charging stations and didn't really do much else. I was kind of overly sensitive to the charging aspect because it is such a different thing with going from a gasoline car to an electric car. So I was hooked on the range, charging and charging stations, so I decided to map a virtual trip from Durham, North Carolina, where I live, to Pasadena, Maryland, where my in-laws live. The system gave me a route. Basically, it said to drive from Durham to Chester, Virginia, top up the battery at 40 minutes. And it actually tells me that I would have 19% of my battery left when I got to Chester, based on what the charge in the vehicle was currently, which I think was about 80%. So it says after a 40-minute stop, take the remainder of the trip without stopping. So So it hung up on the supercharger stations, and so the co-pilot that I was working with did a search and randomly selected one that was in Wilmington, North Carolina as a reference, and he showed me. So it's really neat because it actually shows you how many charging stalls are available, how many kilowatts the max charge rate is, tells you where it is, how far it is, tells you what amenities are there, whether there's restrooms, food, coffee, lodging, shopping, Wi-Fi. It's actually really neat. So after the amazement of the touchscreen wore off, I kind of started looking around, and then I noticed that there was music playing. When I looked at the instrument cluster, I noticed that there was album art on the left side, and it was actually an album by Heart playing some music from the 70s. It was pretty awesome. So there's lots of information on that panel, even if you don't really realize it. The center of the unit shows your speed, which is just above a little virtual vehicle. Which in reality the vehicle is surrounded by a matrix of cameras and ultrasonic sonar waves. This is how the vehicle determines your proximity to things like other cars, curbs, and even the lane lines on the road. The battery charge fuel gauge is on the bottom left, which at this time showed that I had 197 miles left on the charge. And it was a nice 86 degrees outside, as you can see next to that, has a little thermometer. So on the opposite side from the charge indicator is the temperature, and you can see the clock and the drivetrain indicator showing that we were in park. To the right, opposite the Heart album art, was the historic battery usage meter. This is actually really cool. It shows how much juice the car's been using during your drive, and the meter bounces between power used and power regained through the regenerative braking. Something that I'd heard of, but I didn't really understand how it worked. So I fixed that by asking how it works. So it basically says you got a car with a big battery in it. The battery powers a motor. When you let off the accelerator or press the brake, the car assists by basically changing the motors from motors to generators, which then pump energy back into the battery. It's a really efficient process, by the way. The aggressiveness at which the car does this when you simply remove your foot from the accelerator can be adjusted in the vehicle driving options. It was kind of weird the first time I let off the gas. It seemed to slow down pretty hard, so I set that to the lower setting. So we strapped in and headed out for the test drive. The first thing that I noticed was that the car had a ton of power. The acceleration is smooth and linear. There was no acceleration curve you see with a gasoline-powered engine with a transmission. Because it's an electric motor, there's no sweet spot for power like a gear-driven transmission has. It's simply just all power all the time. I tried to see just how hard I could get the car to accelerate by pressing the pedal all the way down. I resisted my every childhood, teenage, and even adult male instincts to do so. I'm sure the co-pilot was probably wondering about that, as I'm sure every single person who gets in the car does just that. It felt like a luxury sports sedan that I'd just driven, a couple weeks before that on a business trip. So this thing had all power, all the stability, all the suspension of that car, and then some. The stability, I think, is due to the fact that the car's low center of gravity, because of the battery pack, is basically in the floor pan. It's situated in the belly of the car between the wheels. This makes the center of gravity so low that I'd be surprised if one of these things could ever be rolled over without really, really trying. So we tooled around on some side roads for a while, and then we hit the highway. The car accelerated as quickly as I'd expected. One thing I immediately noticed on the center display was that the car shows every sonar echo on the instrument panel, going so far as actually showing other vehicles around me. I activated the autopilot, which let the car drive for a while. It was weird. It was a little jumpy as it kind of stayed in the lanes, but it did it really well. One place it got confused was where I was in the far right lane and went past an off-ramp. The car started to kind of move over a little bit, but as soon as we passed the ramp, it realized that the lane wasn't actually turning, and so it immediately corrected. This is why they state that the autopilot is no replacement for hands on the wheel and eyes on the road. So one cool thing that the co-pilot showed me was the voice search on the radio. I asked the radio to play Joe Satriani, and it did. Like Pandora, it built me a radio station called Joe Satriani, started playing his music, interspersed with a mix of music from other similar artists. Man, I was in hog heaven, Buster. Hog heaven! So we went back to the sales office, and I didn't really want it to end. I decided right then and there, if I ever get the opportunity, I'm going to buy one. The cost is really high for the Model S, roughly $76,000, I think, for the one that I test drove. That, like I said, was a stock vehicle. But the Model 3, which is currently getting its first units out to customers, is like less than half that. And there might be a more realistic option for me down the road, but that's still out of my budget for the foreseeable future. Hopefully, whatever the model that comes next, the Model 4 or whatever, will be even more affordable, with the bulk of the vehicles being, the battery cost. And Tesla's doing a lot to reduce this cost with research and building their gigafactory where they're going to be manufacturing batteries. So hopefully at some point I'll actually be able to drive one of these things and say that it's mine.